right. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Maureen Johnson, occupational therapy faculty on the San Marcos campus. And I'm also head and director of classification for parasurfing and adapted surfing. So being head of classification, I have to conduct research on every test and measure that we use in our classification structure. And the one I'm going to be sharing today has to do with spinal cord injury. My title is Surfers with Spinal Cord Injury Stratification, Anatomical versus Functional Spinal Levels to Sports Performance. So let me explain what this means. I want to start with understanding surfing, and then I'll talk about adapted surfing, then I'll talk about the structure so that we're all on the same page so you can understand where I'm coming from. So traditional surfing, there's shortboarding, which is a shorter board. It's quick, fast maneuvers, very aggressive surfing, very exciting to watch. Then there's longboarding, which is typically a 9-foot longboard, where the pop-up is a little bit slower, it's more graceful, and they do tricks like walking on the nose, hanging 5, hanging 10 of their toes over the edge of the nose of the board. Very beautifully done most of the time. Then there's stand-up paddleboard, which is a mid-size surfboard with a paddle. And it's kind of that in-between where they'll walk up and they'll be aggressive with their maneuvers. There's drop knee bodyboarding, and then there's regular bodyboarding. For adapted surfing, we have physical and visual sport classes. So it's because these athletes cannot enter into an able-bodied competition or contest because of their permanent physical or visual impairments. So for physical surfing, we have standing sport classes, and that could have an impairment of the arm or the leg. There are kneeling sport classes, which could be impairment of one leg but above the knee, or maybe a low-level spinal cord injury. There's sitting sport class where they sit on a surfboard and they use a paddle, and that's usually for bilateral amputations above the knee or spinal cord injury. And then there's the prone where they lie on their stomach. And as you can see from these pictures here, it's also very aggressive with their maneuvers and very exciting to watch, especially if you can appreciate the level of physical impairments that these athletes have and what they're doing in overhead pumping surf. It's very exciting. For the visual sport classes, for Paralympics, there are 3 levels of vision. They call it B1, B2, B3, where B1 is completely blind, and B2 and B3 are in the blind category, but with different levels. But because surfing is an outdoor sport with glare and sun and water reflections, that we were advised to have just 2 sport classes. So we have a blind, no vision, and then we have a blind, low vision that are still considered permanently blind. And again, very impressed with if you understand vision and then you understand surfing and what these athletes with no or very low vision are doing. So the surfing positions tend to relate to common diagnoses. So for standing divisions, it's usually someone with an amputation or a congenital limb dysmelia, like they're born that way. And sometimes they use prostheses and sometimes they don't. There's brachial plexus injury of the arm. There's short stature that's in this category because they stand, as well as the blind and low vision athletes. In kneeling, it's typically amputations, but with no prosthesis use, and low-level spinal cord injuries like lumbar levels. Sitting, again, is bilateral amputations or spinal cord injury from thoracic and lumbar region. And then the prone category, where they're lying on their stomach, it's going to be triple or quadruple amputations in the athlete, spinal cord injury, but higher up. So cervical or high thoracic, cerebral palsy, and MS are the common diagnoses. So also to clarify, we have adapted surfing, which is the world tour, the adapted world tour that follows WSL. And we have the parasurfing, which is Paralympic track to get us into the Paralympic Games. And we're striving for 2028 of the Paralympics. and they make their announcement at the end of December or in January. So we're very close to knowing if we're in or not to the Paralympic Games. So adapted surfing is for absolutely everyone and anyone. So it can be at camps, adapted surf camps, where people are learning how to surf with their situation. And then it can become a recreational sport. So they can go surfing with their friends and family. And then they can enter into this professional adapted world tour where it's high level competition. And a lot of these athletes are paid to compete. And it's individual competition. The Paralympic track, you're actually surfing for your nation. Just like the Olympics and the Paralympics, you are surfing for your country and you represent your country in regional, like all of Europe contests or all of Africa contests, as well as the world contest. And only those eligible to go get to compete at the world stage. So it'll be 18 athletes, 9 men and 9 women, and 1 for each category. We have medical classification, and to become a classifier, one must be a licensed occupational therapist, physical therapist, medical practitioner like a doctor or a nurse practitioner. It can't be an athletic trainer because that's usually very specific to orthopedics or muscles, not necessarily diagnoses like brain injuries and spinal cord injuries. You have to go through training. So there's a training period to become a classifier. And then there are levels of classification for the 2 national levels. So you only classify athletes in country, or there are international levels where you travel and classify at the larger events. And yes, we do have our clinic on the sand. Like, I can't get any closer to the water. This is the best clinic I've ever worked in, where the athletes come in and they get different tests and measures. So it'd be manual muscle testing, goniometry, measuring lengths of residual limbs, spasticity testing, reflex testing, coordination testing, a lot of things that our OT and PT students learn, but it's at the next level. And then from that, we make decisions into which of the 9 sport classes they're allocated to compete. So this is my problem, and this is that stemmed this situation. One of our sport class, we have 2 prone sport classes. One sport class, they're independent. So as soon as they get into the water, off they go. They need no assistance. And they paddle out, they catch their wave, ride their wave, they fall off their board, they get themselves back up on their board, and they go back out. The other one is where they need physical assistance in the water. So they need someone to help them get back up on their surfboard. They get pushed into a wave, yet they ride the wave on their own, but there's someone there to catch them and then bring them back out. And so they're riding the wave, doing the maneuvers independently, but they need dependence to get on and off the board and to position themselves into the wave. So these are the higher level cervical spinal cord injuries, like someone who has a C6, C7 spinal cord injury. And my problem is I initially wrote the classification structure that if arms are independent, are 100%, so 5 out of 5 strength with full flexibility, they have to surf independent. And if their arms are impaired, like for C6 spinal cord injury, then they're allowed to have assistance in the water. But what I have found is there's this range of the high thoracic level. I call it no man's zone. So it's from T2 to T5. If you remember the spinal cord injury, or the spinal cord levels, T1 does abduction and adduction, and then T2 is upper sensory. But after that, the limbs are intact at the neuro level. But what was happening is the athletes couldn't be independent. It wasn't safe for them. We had to do a lot of rescues, and they physically couldn't do it, even if they adapted their boards. So I wanted to look at, okay, what is happening with their performance based on their diagnoses, and if they're complete or incomplete. So my research question was, what sport class should these athletes in the T2 to T5 complete range, where should they be allocated? So what I did is I gathered all my records of any of the athletes that had a spinal cord injury and their manual muscle testing classification results from both upper extremities and lower extremities, and then their final competition rankings, like how well did they do? And I did it from 3 international surf competitions from 2019 to 2021. And I used construct reliability of each stratification. So that was tested for my reliability analysis. And then for dimensionality, it was determined with exploratory factor analysis by fixing the factors as 2. So the analysis was restricted to the 2 types of stratifications, functional versus anatomical. And to determine the impact of strength, the strength of the limbs, the ranking, and its association of which type of stratification, functional versus anatomical, was using the logistic multiple regression analysis. That's how we used it. So let me go into more detail about what I mean. So we have the anatomical levels and of our spinal cord as we're trained on in school and as we work in our practice. And I initially allocated sport classes. So if someone was T1, T2 to T5, because their arms are considered intact and innervated, they were automatically put into the independent sport class. So I used anatomical. However, what I'm finding is functionally, they have the same functional ability as someone who is at the cervical level, which initially did not make sense to me. But with the sport of surfing and all that is required biomechanically, even if they adapted their surfboards and put foam wedges to hold the trunk up, they have no trunk. And so I started looking at, okay, what is it? So here's this range, T2 to T5. And then I started asking myself, who calls what level? Like, how do we describe this in the literature? So if you look at this table, I looked at everyone I could find, and it really wasn't that much. So Altman and all, Olson, Chen, Quizanos, Gagnon, I looked at textbooks all the way down. And here are the spinal cord levels all the way across from head to toe. We're not even in agreement of what is high thoracic, mid thoracic, upper thoracic, high level spinal injury, low level spinal injury. So there's confusion there. And here's my cutoff, T5 to T6, because I was really looking at T2 to T5 because they were struggling. They were struggling in competition. They were complaining. And I'm observing them going, they're not able to do what the athletes below, T6, T7, T8, what they could do. So then I asked myself, okay, where are things innervated in the body? So if you look at this is the levels of innervation, and these are the muscles. And each one of these, A, B, C, D, are different researchers who say at this level, a rectus spinae is innervated, rectus abdominis, external oblique, okay? So what I found is, okay, there's not consensus in the literature either of when abdominals kick in, when do obliques kick in. There was a consensus. So the majority found that T6 triggered. The majority of the studies for each one of these columns had T6 most consistently had obliques, rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, and of course a rectus spinae, depending on the level of the cord. And so my thought was thinking, maybe athletes with T6 and below should be independent, and athletes with that T2 to T5 should move over to be allowed assistance. And so I looked more at that. And so with this study, I went through all my records at the time of eligible participants. So they had to be over 18 and they had to be already a competitive athlete with us. And I found 70 of their archive data that I could use. So I had 56 male and 14 female. And their sport classes where they were assigned were 9 in kneeling, 11 in sitting, 25 in prone 1, and 25 in prone 2. So prone 1 is their independent, and prone 2 is that they needed assistance. And so here's kind of an image of what they look like when they're surfing. And so here you can see kneeling. This is a kneeling with low-level spinal cord injury. This is a low thoracic spinal cord injury in a sitting position. Here's prone 1, where you can see both arms are free to move. And here's prone 2, where this athlete is level T3. So they have hands and they can use their hands, but they can't let go of the board because they don't have trunk to let go. Okay. And even though they have adaptations on their board, they couldn't do it. And so what I found is, yes, there was a strong correlation between strength of the upper extremity, left, right, and bilateral, that had better scoring potential. So they scored higher, meaning they ranked lower. So if you're number 1, you're ranked, it's a low rank. You know, if you rank number 10 at the contest, it's a high rank. So it's kind of opposite that way. And then I found that comparing my anatomical, so that's the cervical levels that we know, C1 to C8, thoracic T1 to T12, like that was anatomical. And then the functional was including T2 to T5 with cervical. I found that both worked. However, using this Cochrane's analogy here, it worked better for the athletes if I did functional classification. And based on their strength testing and based on their performance, they actually did better in the other sport class when I moved them over. So as I just mentioned, they both worked. The functional stratification, so including the T2 to T5 range with the cervical group, worked better for them. There was a significant difference in the sport performance because arm strength did influence the performance, but if we don't have trunk to hold up the body, arms can't be and work as efficiently as if they had trunk. And one thing that did come out of it, which is really good, is that there wasn't a significant difference with leg strength and trunk strength. So that is that's good news, saying that that didn't influence their performance because they're not supposed to have strength in their legs. And then there was a significant difference between arm and trunk strength combined for the prone 1 and the prone 2. So basically what's happening is I'm in a trial period where for 2 years, where I'm using functional stratification for the athletes. So if they were, they have a complete T2 to T5 spinal cord injury, they're allowed to compete in the prone division that requires assistance, and that we're seeing how it's going to go. And the other thing, that it was important that I had 4 different sport classes for people with spinal cord injuries. So that's good too, to know that works. So I'm in this trial period. I'm 1 year in. Well, I'm in the middle of it, I should say. And it seems to be working well. The athletes who have shifted over are not winning, so it doesn't look like there's an unfair competitive advantage. I wanted to give it a full time to 2024 to see, but we're just kind of in the waiting game right now to see how it goes. And I'm presenting this to you guys. I'm also presenting this study to the Paralympic Committee next month, actually in 2 weeks. Ooh, it's already that soon. And I just really wanting your feedback as professionals, and what do you think about this? Because we usually teach T2 to T5 is separate than cervical regions. So that's my study that is also been published in Journal of Sports Science and Medicine. And I'm done. Are there any questions? All right. Well, there are no questions. So thank you so much for listening.
And this is only for complete, right? So for incomplete,
no.
Okay. So all bets are off for that.
That's correct.
Okay. And you said manual muscle testing doesn't seem to have predictive value. Is that what I understood?
It has partial predictive value.
Okay. Because I think you and I've talked about the fact that that's still under voluntary control. So, could an athlete underperform during classification and then perform better in competition? Yeah.
Oh, 100%. And the difference is when they surf for like the Paralympic structure, they're not getting paid. And when they surf for the adapted world tour, they're getting paid thousands of dollars if they win. So there's a lot of money on the line, and they're still not winning. They don't have the ability. So my study, I'm limited to the people I researched, of course, but I'm also wanting to do a study on the interlimb coordination of arms and trunk. I think that's the piece. And I know Paralympic swim, Luke Hogarth is doing studies on that with Paralympic swimming. The importance of trunk strength for arm efficiency.
I see.
Yeah.
Because one of the other things that hopefully if we ever get our data published is going to, so you and I talked about where we have the person, they've done in able-bodied surfers, having them push down against the force plates to kind of assess what they actually have.
Right.
Without maybe cueing them exactly as to what it's measuring. But well, very interesting. Like I said, I think what you're doing is amazing.
Just trying to figure it out. What would be best for the athletes?
Well, and the thing is, what's best for the community, though, right? Because you can't be what you can't see. That's for me. Like, why rehab somebody? Why go through rehab if you're not looking like a major change in your life? But when you see people competing on, on the world stage, it's like, oh, maybe that could be me. So that's what I think is so important about this research.
Yeah, and knowing where they go. And I worked a lot with the Paralympic classification crew, and they advised me to have wider gaps, and then just don't include athletes with complete T2 to T5. And I'm like, I'm not comfortable excluding people. Occupational therapists, you're like, I want everyone in the world. So thinner line, wider gaps.
The bigger cutoffs, you mean?
Yeah, but I'm not comfortable with that. I think we're a growing progressive sport, and I don't want to exclude anyone at this point.
Well, yeah, and imagine that, like, if it gets into the Olympics, then all of a sudden you're going to get a lot more competitors, and all of a sudden you got a much bigger N, and so it's like, oh yeah, now we can make better decisions. But until we get the sport out there, we don't get the participants, and without the participants, we can't come up with better guidelines.
That's right. Right now we have 410 athletes classified. We have the world competition coming up in 4 weeks, and then that will probably get us to 450. So we still don't have enough. I mean, they said, the Paralympic Committee said that if we get into 2028, it's the 2032 that our numbers will probably double or triple. And then I think we can make more informed decisions.
Yeah. I mean, I used to do triathlons. I remember when it was in the 2000 Olympics, like the sport blew up.
Yeah.
Participation blew up. So I'm imagining that Paralympic surfing is going to blow up if it gets in.
I hope so. Get more people out in the water.
Yeah, exactly. Except not when I'm out there.
Yeah, except when I'm out there.
Thanks, Mo.
Bye. Thank you so much.